Leah.
All right, great. Thank you, Thomas, and welcome everyone. My name is Leah Brock from LegalServer. I'll be leading us through the training here today. So first couple of things just to mention about your LegalServer site. So number one is that it is a web-based software. So all that really means for you all is that you don't have to download anything onto your computer. You'll access LegalServer just through your web browser. So as long as you've got internet access, a secure internet connection, and of course you have your username and password that you'll be getting if you don't already have one, you will be able to get to your LegalServer site from any device. So if you are on, your desktop at work or your laptop at home or your mobile device or tablet while you're in court, you're going to be able to access the system, again, as long as you've got that internet connection. As mentioned, LegalServer, of course, is secure, so you will need that username and password to get into the site every time that you want to log in. Also, just to mention, we are going to be working in what we call your demo site here today. So we're just going to be training in your demo environment. So it might look just a bit different than your live site will. So the real site that you're going to be working in, we call that your live site. Again, we're going to be training here in demo just to make sure we don't affect your real database, of course. But most everything should look very similar, if not exactly the same, once you get into your live site there, especially including the functionality and things we'll talk through. All right, so that is just a little bit of the basics. So what we're going to do first, our first kind of section for today is going to be an introduction to your site. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of talk a little bit about navigating around your LegalServer site. So when I first log into LegalServer, of course, with my username and password, I'm going to be brought to our homepage. And the homepage might look a little bit different depending on the type of user that you are in the system. But generally, it's going to have information specific to you as the logged in user. So as we're looking at this homepage, for me, I see a couple of my cases that I'm assigned to have some alerts on them. So I would see any of those up front. I can click on that to expand it and see the actual alerts that are going on. And then I have a couple of different tabs and lists under those tabs here. So the first one is my assignments. So as the name suggests, any cases that I am assigned to. This will show me some basic information about those cases. I also, of course, can click into the specific cases. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. And another thing about this particular list view is that you'll have this action option. So you can record activities or time on these cases that you are assigned to without actually having to click into them. You can do that right here from the homepage. So next over, we've got our incomplete intake. So this, of course, is relevant for those of you who are going to be entering case records into the system, doing intakes. So if you've started an intake and you did not finish it and create a case out of that intake, you're going to see it sitting here waiting for you to finish out that intake. We also have a tab for recently accessed, and that simply means that you have recently clicked into that case and looked at it. So it's a case that, of course, you have access to, but you may or may not actually be assigned to it. But if you have recently looked at it and clicked and looked into that case record, again, you're going to be able to see it here and recently accessed, and again, be able to click into that full case profile. We also have a tab here for my calendar. So here I would see any upcoming calendar events that are specific to, again, me, the logged in user. So any events that I might have created or someone else created and attached me as an attendee. So you'll notice I have one hearing today. I can hover over, see a little bit more information, and even have a quick link to the case that is tied to this event. And then finally, I have my full office calendar. So this one's going to show me any events in my office, and it will automatically be, again, specific to your office when you're logged in. So here I can see not only my event, the one that I'm actually an attendee on, but I also see John's event, again, because it's in my same office. So that is our home page. The last thing really to mention is we've got our pre-screen or survey and also intake links available here. Intake is going to be our second session to talk through today during the training. So we're going to hold on actually getting into those pre-screen and intake processes. But I do just like to mention that they are here on the home page, and especially that they are on what we call a sidebar element. You're going to see these throughout the site in different places. And the reason I bring this up is because sidebars like this one can be toggled off. So if you see this little icon with the arrow, I can click that and toggle off my sidebar. And you might find when you're working in the system that you want to do that if you want a little bit more real estate for, the rest of your page. So your main tabs here. The other reason I bring that up though is because if you do toggle that sidebar off, it's going to stay off until you toggle it back on. So if I were to log out of the system right now and come back tomorrow and log in, it would look like this. And if I forgot that I had done that, I might be wondering, where did my intake links go? And the answer would be we just have to click that icon again to toggle our sidebar back on. And again, you're going to see sidebars throughout the site. Same thing, you'll see that same little logo that you can use to toggle it on and off. All right, so that should be everything for our home page. Again, just keeping in mind that it is specific to you as the logged in user. And I'm just checking chat, but it looks like everything there has been answered so far. So we'll move on to talking a little bit more about the navigation throughout the site. So I like to start that with talking about our 3 stripes at the top of the site. So it's our top stripe with your logo, that white stripe at the top, and then the dark green and light green ones, which by the way will be blue in your live version of your site. So an easy way to differentiate between the two. But these are going to be at the top of your screen in LegalServer no matter where you are. So if I were to click into one of our cases, I'm still going to see those stripes at the top. If I were to head over to maybe our main timekeeping page, again, I see our stripes there. So at the very top, again, we've got what we call your user stripe. So it starts with your logo on the left and your site name. We then have our message center. This is, again, something that may or may not show depending on the type of user you are in the system and what types of permissions and things that you have. But if you do have the message center available, you would be able to see any LegalServer messages here. And really the message center within LegalServer is just an internal messaging option. So you can use this to send messages to other users. If I click into the message center, you'll see here how I can send a message. I can associate it to a case or an outreach or task or event if I want to. And I can again send that message to another user. So really just an internal messaging. It's also available for things like reminders on events, tasks, and deadlines. And again, if you have any, you would see them up here and be able to read through your messages. I also have a My Time bubble. So if you're going to be keeping time in LegalServer, this will just show you an overview of the time that you've entered so far today. So if I've put in a couple of hours of time on things I've worked on so far today, I can keep track of that up here. Next up, we have your user bubble. So this is going to show your name when you're logged into the system. And when you hover over that user bubble, you'll see a couple of different links available. The first one and the last 2 will actually bring you to the same place. These will just bring you to a specific tab on your user profile. But if you want to see the information for your user account, maybe come and check and make sure your phone number's in here correctly and your email address looks good, or any other information just tied to your user account, you can come here and look at your user profile. More useful, if you ask me though, is the second link there called My Preferences. These are going to be a list of preferences that you all each get to update for your own user account. So as you probably know, Most of you will not be able to make site-wide changes, so changes that would affect everyone who logs into your site. There's only a handful of folks who will have that ability. We call them administrators. But if you're not an administrator, again, you're not going to be able to change things for other users. However, again, you do have this list of preferences that you can update just for yourself. So feel free to pop in here once you get your login if you haven't already, and play around with these preferences, adjust them as many times as you want to, because again, they only affect your login. I'm not going to talk through all of these. I do, again, encourage you to come check out this page and play around with these preferences. But there are a couple that I do specifically want to point out. So the first one is this interface font size. So if you log into LegalServer on your preferred device and you're thinking, it'd be nice if the font throughout was a little bit bigger, easier to see, this is the setting for you. So the default is 11, but you'll notice if I up this to 14 and just take a peek at kind of what the font size looks like right now, I'm going to hit continue, to set that. And now you'll notice the font is a bit bigger. And again, you can adjust that as many times as you want to. So keep adjusting until you get to a font size that looks good to you. Also, just note that you are able to use your browser function of zooming in and zooming out. So, control or command, plus sign and minus sign. You can use kind of a combination of those to, again, just get the screen formatted how it looks best for you. The next two actually that are related that I want to point out are these number of results to show. So this is essentially just saying how many results do we want to show before we have to click next and see the next page of results. So it's really personal preference, but I have found that many users would really prefer to see more things on one page and then have to click to the next page. So this is where you can adjust that. And the reason we have two different settings are for two different types of results. So this first one is number of Ajax search results. That's when you see an Ajax search box. So the easiest way, and I'm going to do this quickly, don't worry if you're not quite following this part, but I'm just going to go open up a case time slip just for the easiest way to show you an Ajax search box. So this is what it will look like. It's a little search box with that magnifying glass. And when I start to type something in, like the client name or case ID, I get some results. Right now, I only get 5 before I have to click next to the next page of results. So that is exactly what this setting would let us do, is bump up the number of results I would see before having to click next. And then the other setting is related to what we call list views in LegalServer. In many places, you all are replacing those with what we call embedded reports. I'll, again, talk a bit more about those in a little bit. But anytime you see a list view in LegalServer, so going back to our homepage, for instance, this My Assignments is a list view. And of course, I'm only currently assigned to 6 cases, but if I were assigned to 25 of them, it would show me 1 through 20, and then I'd have to click next to see the next 5. So again, I can up that in my settings so that I'm able to see more on that one page. Scrolling down a bit more, there are just 2 other ones I want to point out here. This first one is the Use Rich Editor for case notes. If you set that to yes, you're going to have more formatting options in your case notes, like doing things like bolding or italics. So a lot of users, again, like those options. And then lastly, this will be relevant for any of you who are going to run reports in the system. So if you don't plan on running reports, you don't think that'll be part of your use of the site, don't have to worry about this, of course. But if you do plan to run reports, this is just a nice way to default the list to just the reports that you mark as your favorites. So if there's a handful of reports you'll be running, you probably want to just see those when you first look at the report list, instead of having to scroll through a big long list of reports that you don't really need to use. So those are just a couple of those preferences wanted to point out specifically, but again, anything on this page you can feel free to update and it will just affect you, the logged in user. So that was our user bubble. The last thing in our top stripe is just the logout button. That is, of course, how you can log out of the system right away. I say right away because there is always going to be an automatic login, and it's somewhere between a half hour and 3 hours. Your administrators get to set that. But somewhere in that time period, whatever it's set to, if you are not active in the system for that amount of time, so let's just say an hour, so you haven't moved screens, you haven't moved around or clicked anything in an hour, LegalServer is going to automatically log you out. And that, of course, is for security reasons. Really important to note is if you do plan to leave your computer, your device for an extended amount of time, just make sure you save whatever you've been working on. So if you're in the middle of an intake or writing a big long case note or entering a time slip or whatever you might be doing in the system, really always a good idea to save your work before you walk away from your computer because you might get logged out automatically in that time period. But again, if you do want to just log out right away, you've got that option with that log out button as well. All right, so that is our top stripe and some of our options available there. Our next stripe is this dark green one, which again will be blue for your real live site. And it is going to be our main navigation tabs. So again, just keep in mind that every user can have different tabs available. So your list of tabs might look a bit different than this one. But you're going to see all of kind of the main sections of LegalServer, what we call modules, that you're able to access. When I click on one of these top tabs, like let's say timekeeping, it's going to bring me to the main, what we call section front for that module. So basically just our main timekeeping page. So here we see some information about timekeeping. I have my timekeeping log. This will show me any of the any of the time slips that I put in this month. So our filter here is this month. And we'll talk later a bit more about how we can adjust those filters on these, what we call embedded reports. But again, the default here is just to see my time this month so far. So of course, I don't have any time slips in here, but if you have some time in the demo site or once you get into your live site and start entering time, you're going to see all of the time you've entered for the month in this list by default. What I also have here is a list of my open cases, so cases that I am assigned to that are currently open. And the reason this is on our main timekeeping page is so that we can see, cases we're likely to want to add time to and add the time. And then lastly, just some cases that we've recently accessed, again, ones we might be interested in adding some time to. So I wanted to describe this timekeeping page really just to show you that when I click on the top tab, again, I see kind of an overview of that module. So in this case, an overview of all of my time in the system. The other big thing to point out about a section front or main page like this one is that your actions menu is where you're going to go to create new records for this module. So here, new time slips in the system. If I go to another module like organizations, so I'm just clicking on that top tab, my actions menu is going to be to add a new organization record. So anytime that you're wanting to add something into the system, go to that section that you want to add something to, go up to actions, and you should see that option. Also, as we're talking about the actions menu, I want to point that out for existing records as well. So if what I wanted to do is maybe edit one of my current organizations, I would click into the organization record, go up to actions, and find my option to edit it or to add a note to it or whatever I want to do with that organization record. So as a recap, if I'm on a main tab, a main section front here, my actions menu allows me to create a new record, like a new organization. But if I am within an existing record, my actions menu allows me to do things to add or edit things on that record. And possibly the easiest example, the most obvious one for that, is if we look at a case profile. So if I go to my list of cases and click into an existing case that we have in the system, my actions menu is going to be where I can do things like add a case note, add time to the case, add tasks to the case and events, assign more people to the case, eventually close the case, etc. So of course, we are not focusing on case management yet for this training today, but this is where you're really going to be able to do your case management, this actions menu here. So if there's one thing you should definitely keep in mind when you're working in LegalServer is that, again, if you want to do something with a record or add a new record, you're probably wanting to look for an actions menu. All right, so that is our main navigation tabs and how we can utilize those to get to kind of the different modules or sections of LegalServer and work within those modules. So next we're going to head to our final stripe, which is this light green one. And you'll see a couple of different options throughout here as well. Again, some things might be a little bit different depending on the type of user that you are in the system. But one thing you'll notice in this light green stripe is this little plus sign, and we call this the quick bar. And this is going to just allow you to start some different processes no matter where you are in the site. So for instance, adding case time. So here I'm on this case profile, or maybe I'm just on our organization section front, or maybe I'm on our reports. Doesn't matter where I am in the system. I can come up to the little plus sign and add case time. And it just gives me a pop-up of our case time slip. So again, these processes might change a little bit for your live site, but anything that is available here, you're going to be able to start that process no matter where you are in the site. Next up, we have our search options. So this is going to be a traditional type of search where we enter some criteria, hit continue, and get a list of possible results. The one that's a little bit different is the case ID. So the reason it's a little bit different is we have to have a full exact case ID to be able to search based on it. So I'm going to cheat and go back to my home page and just steal a case ID from my list of assignments here and just copy it. And then I'm going to go back to my search on case ID and paste that ID in. So if you have a full exact case ID, the really nice thing is that once I hit continue, it brings me directly into that case profile because there's no question about which case I'm looking for. Obviously, every case has its own unique ID. But the rest of these options will again be more of a traditional search. So for instance, our people search, this will search all people connected to cases like clients, adverse parties, other case contacts, judges, witnesses, etc. So I would put in whatever criteria that I know. Any combination of these data points I can put in here. Also note you have these begins with checkboxes available. Those can be really handy for different scenarios. Like for instance, let's say someone left me a message and I could tell that their first name was Test and their last name started with T, but I couldn't really quite make out the last name, or I don't know how to spell it. I can just put in what I do know, the T, click begins with, and then once I hit continue and get my list of results, I would see anyone who has a first name of Test or looks or sounds like Test and a last name that starts with T. So most of these are going to be just test. But again, anything that starts with T would be a last name that would appear within the results. All right, so there are, of course, other searches we can do. We can search contacts in the system. We can search our documents. So you've got lots of options for what you're wanting to search throughout the system. All right, so we have already talked a bit about our actions menu. Again, depending on where we are in the site, the actions menu is going to be different. Because I'm just here on my search page, I can see my intake and pre-screen options, the same options like we saw just on our home page here. But again, depending on where I am in the site, I'm going to have different actions available. You also might have some different views available throughout the site, places like your home page or your case profile, and that would just give you another view of that page. So for instance, on the homepage, I'm allowed to see our homepage with the contract attorney view. Again, depending on permissions, you may or may not have that available. I also have what I call the little admin tab here. Most of you will not see that when you're logged in. That is only for administrators. And if you are an admin, you should already know, how to use that little admin button. So I'm going to skip over that. So next up is our help bubble. So the help bubble, you're going to see a couple of links under there. The first two are actually going to bring you to our main help site. So if you ever get stuck working in LegalServer, you've got a question, or you're wondering if something is possible in the system, of course, your admins are going to be great resources, but you can also head to our help site. This is a quick link to get there, but you don't have to come through your site. You can just put in help.legalserver.org into your URL bar. And again, you don't have to be logged into LegalServer or have a special username and password or anything like that. You can just head to that website and you'll be able to access our help site here. But this is really where we keep all of our LegalServer documentation. We've got things like a really quick start guide on how to use it, intro and overview. So the information we're talking about right now, we've got that on our help site just in text, and also a video available of a previous session similar to what we're doing here today. And again, just more information about the site, about the different pieces of the site, different modules, things like that. So that is available for anyone who uses LegalServer. So again, if you've ever got questions or just kind of want to see if something is available in the system, you can come check our help site and see if there's some more information available. The last option under the help bubble is called support request. It's going to be pretty rare, if ever, that you're going to have to use this, because this is a request directly to our LegalServer developers. This should not be used for internal questions or issues. So if you have something like, hey, I was doing an intake and social security number was required and I don't think it should be, I've been getting a lot of pushback on that, that's something you want to go directly to your admins about. That is not something you should enter this support request for, because unfortunately our developers, wouldn't be able to make that choice and make that change for you. That's really all up to your admins. However, if instead the scenario is I was working on a case and I, entered a time slip and I hit continue and I got a big error message, that is a time when you would want to enter one of these support requests. And the reason I said it will be rare, if ever, that you'll need to do that, actually come here to click. I'm not being overly optimistic that you'll never run into an issue, although I hope you don't. But the reason I say that is because if you do ever run into those functional issues in the system, 99% of the time, this screen will just pop up for you automatically. So it will pop up once you hit that error. You'll be able to put in some information about what just happened. That will get sent to the developers of LegalServer, and they will fix that for you really quickly. And then you'll be able to get back into your site and do whatever you were trying to do. So again, this is how you would get there on the fly, but almost always, if you need it, this will pop up automatically for you. All right, so that brings us to the final item in our final stripe here at the top, which is our timer. This is optional. This is, of course, available for those of you who will be entering time into the system. And it's really just an optional way to keep track of how much time you're spending on an activity. So you'll see we can start a timer just for non-client time, or we have some of our recently clicked on cases here. So I'm just going to start a timer for Joe Doe here. And I would be able to let that timer run for however long I'm doing this activity. So maybe I'm on the phone with him doing an interview, writing some notes. Again, I just let it run for that time period. You will see that it says running up there. If you see that, that means it is actively running and recording the time for you. But one thing that can be a little bit confusing at first is that it's going to show all zeros until we get to a minute. So it kind of looks like it would be showing you minutes and seconds, but it's really going to just show you hours and minutes. So until we hit that minute mark, it's going to be all zeros. But as long as you see running, know that it is running for you. Another thing just to mention is you can only have one timer running actively at a time, but you can pause this one, start another one, and then start yours back up. And the time spent would be calculated just based on how long it was actually actively running for. So I'm going to go ahead and just stop this timer. Don't know if I let it run for long enough to record for us. I didn't because we're intense. We'd have, I think, at least 6 minutes to get that to tick over for us. But you'll see how it did record, when did I start it? When did I stop it? And if I had let it run long enough, we would get our time spent calculated based on that start and stop time. So we're not going to get into more into timekeeping. We've already done that a couple times today, but wanted to point out that timer and that it is available for you if you're going to be entering time in the system. All right, so let me check the chat. I see a couple of chats in there as well. Yes, so there was a question about attaching documents to cases and whether you'll be able to store documents within LegalServer, including videos and audio, and the answer is yes. So that, again, is something we'll get into the details of during the case management session, which I believe will be the ones next week, if I've got that right. But yes, you can absolutely upload and attach documents. And we call them documents. We really mean files. So including things like video and audio files directly to your cases in the system. And I also see a question about the training videos. As far as the videos we're taking specifically of your trainings in these couple of weeks, that will be up to you all on how you distribute those or share them with anyone new in your organization. You're going to be able to, or I should say Thomas will be able to download the videos of these recordings of these trainings, and you'll be able to have them for however you all want to use them. And when it comes to our YouTube videos, because we do have a whole YouTube channel with training videos, more general, of course, not specific to your organization, those are also available to anyone at any time. So those will be available for anyone new who might be joining your organization in the future as well.
Thanks, Leah. And I'll continue to try to disseminate that information as well. But as I mentioned, we will be recording these. They will be on our YouTube channel as well, and the links will be on the DIDS website. So you can get specific trainings there, or LegalServer has a whole channel on YouTube, and it's all broken down into various playlists by subject. There's a lot of helpful information there. Thanks, Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, so next thing I just want to cover for our intro overview, I promised to get back to this, was how we do navigate into case records. And the reason that I bring this up is because when we're looking at lists of cases, so for instance, on the homepage, my assignments list, I see my list of cases I'm assigned to, and there are 2 clickable links. So you'll notice that the client's name is clickable and the case ID is clickable. 99% of the time, for most users, I should say, you're going to want to be clicking on that case ID. That is going to bring you to the case profile. So if you remember, this is where our actions menu is going to give us all of our different case management options, adding new documents, adding time, notes, etc. So most of the time, again, if I'm working on a case, I want to be here on the case profile. As I scroll down, you can see, this is where I see all of the specific information about this case, where I can come and see the documents that have been uploaded to it, etc. So most of the time, again, I want to click on that case ID to be here on the case profile. The alternative option is to click on the client's name, which brings me to what we call the client profile. And this is really just an overview of everything that we have going on for this person. So if Joe here had multiple cases in the system, I would see all of those cases listed here. So if we'd helped Joe before a couple years ago and we had that data in the system, again, I would see that case related to his client record here. I would also be able to see things like family members, case notes, time entries, adverse parties, and address information, again, across all of those cases for this person, this client. So it's a good overview of everything we've got going on for this person. But again, I really can't see any specifics about cases besides obviously the things showing here like notes. But I can't see all of the specific data about a case. And I also really can't do anything from the client profile. So I can't add a new case note from here. I can't edit someone's financial information or assign anyone else to a case or close a case. None of those actions are available from the client profile. Really, the only thing I can do from the client profile is change client case associations. So if I think, I'm talking to Joe on the phone and he says, wait a minute, I have another case open with you all, and you're saying, I don't see it associated here. I could click associate other cases with this client. It would do a search on anyone else in the system who has that name. So here I see there's actually an incomplete intake someone started that has the name Joe Doe. And I would say, oh yes, that must be, the intake you started with us the other day. Select and associate that with our client record. So this time, if I click into his client profile, I see both of those records listed here. So that is the client profile versus case profile. Again, a client profile is going to give you just that overview, and that is from clicking on the client's name. The case profile gives you more of those details and allows you to actually work with the case, and we get there by clicking on the case ID. All right, so the last thing to really cover and take a peek at for our introduction section before we get into talking about your intake is going to just be working with some of these various lists throughout your site. So I had kind of thrown around the term embedded report earlier, so I wanted to give you a little bit more information about what that actually means. So really, it's just a list of records, and it's coming from the report database. But as far as utilizing these lists, all you really need to know is it's a list of records. So in this case, on my cases main tab, on my cases tab, I have a list of open or pending cases. And I know that it's just open or pending cases because of this filter that I see at the top of the list. I also know that it's only open or pending cases in my office because of the top filter on the list here. So for each of you, again, when you're logged in, it's going to be set to your office. So you're just going to see the open or pending cases in your own office. So that particular filter I can't change. You'll notice the little lock next to it. It means I can't change it. But if I click show more filters, I can adjust or apply any of these additional filters. So I could, for instance, edit the case disposition filter and say, I don't want to see just open or pending. I also want to see closed cases. And I can add in that to my filter, click apply and refresh. And now I'm seeing closed cases in the list as well. Going back up to my filter options, besides those two defaults, you'll see I also have these other options to filter on. And when we're talking about filters on a list or a report, we're just saying, what do we want to limit based on? What criteria do we want to limit, what records are returned? So I might decide that I only want to see any of these cases that were opened in a certain date range. So maybe any that were opened, let's say, previous year. Apply and refresh. And now we are down to the 4 cases that match all of the filters I have applied. So again, each of these lists is going to have, a default. So these are the types of records you will see every time you click into the list, but also have these filters available so you can limit or expand the records that you're seeing depending on what your purpose is for looking at that list, essentially. So another example would be if I head back to our timekeeping page. We looked at our timekeeping log earlier. This is another embedded report. So here I have another locked filter, which is that I'm only going to be able to see my time. So the advocate is me. However, the date of service filter that defaults to this month, I can click to edit that and again, set it to any date range that I want to. So maybe I want to see all of my time for the entire year, set it to current year, apply and refresh. And now I see all of my time for the year sectioned out by month. And again, I can show more filters and filter by any of this criteria. So maybe I only want to see my time for this year, where the activity type is something specific. Let's say staff. It was a staff type of activity. I chose a bad value because I didn't get any results, but again, you'll see how I can keep filtering, based on the criteria that I'm looking for. So that is how we can utilize the filters on an embedded report. So embedded reports will look like this. Again, you'll see that most of the filters will be hidden by default. Only the ones that have a default will show, but you'll notice that show more filters button, and you can use that to expand your filter options. So those are embedded reports, how we can filter those. The other thing I just want to touch on is what we call list views. So you will still see some of these traditional list views throughout your site as well. And again, we have default filtering on them. So for this one, only showing open cases. And for this, if you want to filter it differently, you're going to want to click on the little filter icon. It looks kind of like a funnel, and that will give you that list of filter options. So really the same functionality, just looks a little bit different. It's a little bit different as far as what you'll click to open up and see those filter options. But again, works the same. I could come here and say, well, I want to see only open cases that have these different case statuses, filter the list and see any that match that criteria I put in.
Hey, Leah, looks like there was a brief question on the embedded reports as to whether those are printable or not.
Oh, yes, great question. So embedded reports are going to be printable just from your browser. So you can print, a Control or Command P from your browser, or you can click at the top. You'll see you can go run the report, and that will give you the actual option to print it out from here. And you can, of course, export to Excel as well if you run the report.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that should be everything I wanted to make sure to point out just about using those embedded reports and those list views. Actually, sorry, the one other thing just to point out is that if you are ever feeling like there's not a filter that you think should be available for an embedded report, that is something that admins can adjust. So back on the cases tab, for instance, if I were looking at these options for my filters and I said, hey, it would be actually really helpful to be able to filter on, let's say, county of residence of the client, just as a very random example. If your admins agree that that would be a helpful option to have available here, they can add it. So just keep that in mind, that these are adjustable, these are flexible. It will take an admin to have to actually add something to this list, but it is an option. It is something that is possible, if it makes sense to do so. So just keep that in mind. List views are slightly less flexible, but again, there could be some options for those as well. All right, so that is officially everything I wanted to make sure to point out for our introduction and overview to your LegalServer site. As I've mentioned, our next session for this training here today is going to focus on the intake in your site. But I just wanted to pause and check and make sure there were no questions that I missed in the chat. I don't think I've missed any, but if there's anything I've missed or if anyone has any additional questions before we move on to talking about intake, please let me know now.
See what a good job you're doing?
Yeah, 0 questions. I must be doing great. All right. Well, we will keep on moving, but if anyone has any questions you've been holding on to, or you're just still typing it into the chat, please feel free to still do so, and we can always circle back. All right. So back on our homepage, as I've mentioned, this is where you're going to find your links to start a new record, start an intake for creating a case in your system. And it's also where you're going to have your surveys. So Michael had pointed out to me that these will never become cases. So we're not going to get into our surveys today because they will not become intakes and then eventually cases. But this is also where you're going to find those options. So if you need to enter survey information, you'll be able to click into those processes right here from that same section on your homepage. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to actually click in. And we also, of course, have your 2 intake processes available here. So we have 2 separate intakes available on your site right now. And I say right now because, again, things might always change or get updated for your live site. You might decide to create another intake someday. But for now, we've got these 2 available on your site. So we have our indigent defense intake and our non-indigent defense intake. We are going to start today and walk through the indigent defense intake. And if anyone wants to take a peek at the other, we can certainly do so as well. But really the functionality of the intakes will be the same. So the way that you walk through an intake, things like the required field markers, all of that's going to be consistent between the 2 intakes. Really the difference is just how they flow and what data do they collect. So I'm going to go ahead and click into the intake here. And one thing just to point out is these learn about sections are not going to be on your live site. So we're going to just ignore those and pretend they're not here. But you'll also notice on our sidebar, which again can be toggled off and back on, you're going to see all of the steps to your intake here. So what steps do I have to go through to create this case in the system? And note that you have to go through these steps in order. So I cannot click forward to the adverse party step until I have finished out the conflict check step. So I do have to go through these in order. I don't necessarily have to finish the intake all in one round. So I will be showing you that if I'm, halfway through an intake and maybe I was on the phone with the client and they said, hey, I'm going to have to call you back. You can leave an intake at the incomplete intake stage. Just kind of leave it where it was, leave it, where you left off talking to them, and then come back into that intake once you get them back on the phone and finish it out. So you are able to do it within more than one session. But again, you're going to have to go through the intake in order to complete it. So our first step of our intake is some initial information. So you'll see the office is going to automatically be set to my office. So your office when you're logged in. We've got our case type. So it's defaulting to appointed, but I can change that if I need to. We also have our county. And you'll notice that these red asterisks, that is our required marker. So if a field has that red asterisk, I have to enter a value, some type of value, to be able to move on. So I'm actually going to set this back to please select just so we can see what it looks like when I do miss that required. So next up, we've got our applicant's name. I'll just use test. So we'll get some conflict check results for that, I believe. We then have our date of birth block, and this utilizes a block, what we call a block in LegalServer, because it's got some extra functionality based on the status that I select. And the same thing is going to happen with our social security number status block as well. So what I mean by that is you'll see the default for each of these is known. And therefore, we have a required field to enter the social and the date of birth. However, I can come back to that status and say unknown or refused and get rid of that required field. And same goes with social. If I say they don't have one or unknown, I don't have to enter it. So the default is that those are required, but I can get around those from updating the status there. We've got our language, whether we need an interpreter, race, and gender, all on this page as well. Those are optional. You'll notice no little red asterisk, so optional for entry here at the intake stage. We then have our address block. I have the option to tag if someone is institutionalized. And then it's going to show me all of the organizations in the system tagged as institutions. And the nice thing is that if we have recorded the address for that institution, it's going to automatically fill that in as the client's address. Of course, if I go back and say they are not institutionalized, I would then be able to just enter an address on the fly. And another thing that you'll notice is that if we enter a zip code in your state, it's going to, well, it's not going to do it because it already did, but it would set the city and county values for me based on that zip code that I've entered. So you'll be able to see the city and county, again, based on the zip if you enter that first. Scrolling down, we can also check that if the mailing address is different, we can enter that as well. We've got some phone numbers to enter. Each of those will also have a note. So you can put in some notes like, for instance, don't call this number before 4 p.m. or whatever might be relevant. We also can show some additional phone numbers, including selecting that preferred number. I can select which numbers can be texted. So with that texting module, you can select that as well. And then I can also enter an email address for the applicant. All the way at the bottom. Oh, yes.
Sorry. Terry has a question about whether there's a place to enter a prison or jail ID number if they're institutionalized. Would that be under intake notes, or where would you put that?
Yeah, so there's nothing specific in the address block that will allow you to add that information. That would be up to you all if you wanted like a separate custom field. So you could build a custom field to record that, or you could certainly add it right into the intake notes.
Yeah, that might be that. We haven't thought of that. So that might be something maybe we can just, I'm sure Stan can add that as a block if that would be valuable to you guys.
Yeah, and I would say I would definitely suggest creating the field for it if it's something you all might want to have reportable or searchable in the system. If that's not a concern, then a note would work just fine as well.
Right. So the notes are not searchable the same way fields are.
So they are searchable from the universal red search, but not as easily searchable, I should say, in things like reports and such.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And speaking of our notes, you will see the intake notes at the bottom of each or most of the steps, if not every one of your intake here. And those are really handy because you can just add to them along the way and it will become one big case note. So we'll have one note that shows all of the different intake notes that we added, at each step of the intake. So we'll just add a note here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. And remember that we did not fill in a required field. So this is what will happen. So it's going to tell me that at the top, what did I miss? And it's going to highlight it in red on the form. So it makes it really easy to see what you've missed. So you can come in, put in that value, and then actually continue on from there. So our second step of the intake is going to be our applicant conflict check results. So this will again return, cases that are a possible conflict in my office. And it's going to be based on the name of the client, or the applicant, I should say at this point, Also, it will look at date of birth and social if we would have entered them, and we'll check for any matching phone numbers. So it's going to use all of that data to try to return anyone here who might be a conflict or just a duplicate even for this case that we're creating. I would see the score on the right. So why did this person appear? The more likely matches towards the top. I also see and can click into the case that is relevant for this, this record, this person. So I can see more information about the case if I need to. And for any client records, you're going to have a radio button, which just allows you to associate your new intake with an existing client. So if I recognize this is the same person, we helped them with another case, I can click that radio button, again, just saying it's the same person for both records. Scrolling down, I can also add and search on any additional names that I have for this applicant. So if they have an alias or a maiden name or former name, I can add that to my case search and get any possible conflict check results for that name as well. And I can do that as many times as I might need to. Scrolling down, we've got our intake notes again. So again, I can keep adding to my notes here. And then we'll continue to our next step, which is our adverse party entry. Before I actually enter our adverse parties or show you how to enter adverse parties, I just want to touch on the fact that, again, as I mentioned, we can start an intake, get partway through it, and then we can decide to pause and come back later if we need to. So just want to show you an example of that, and at the same time, show you that you do have to save information as you go throughout your intake before you navigate away. So what I mean by that is, let's say that I were to add another note here. So we're going to add just another note to our intake notes box. But now I'm going to pretend that we were on the phone with this applicant and they have to get off the phone with me and they're going to call me back later. So I don't have the other information to fill out the rest of this page. So I'm just going to navigate away. So I'm going to go back to my home page. I'm going to go, run a new report or whatever else I need to do in the system today. And then when that person calls me back, I would head to my incomplete intakes on my home page or from my cases tab. And I would find the incomplete intake that I'm looking for. It's going to sort them by intake date for me. So the more recent ones will be towards the top automatically. I'm going to click into it on that case ID, and it's going to bring me right back to where I left off. But because I did not actually hit continue to save the note that we entered, it did not save. So just keep that in mind, as you're entering data in the system for intake, but also just generally. So if you were on the closing form of a case and you entered a bunch of closing information, if you don't hit a save or continue button, that data is not going to save. So make sure you're saving things throughout as you're entering the data, again, before you navigate away from that page. But also important to show you that, again, we can leave an intake incomplete, pop back into it, and finish it out later. So for our adverse party step here, we have 3 different types of adverse parties that you can enter, and you can enter any combination of the 3. So you could have a case that has 3 individual adverse parties, or another one that has 1 individual and 2 organizations, or again, whatever combination that you need. So for individual or organization adverse parties, pretty simple. We would enter the name of the organization or individual. Relationship type we also have required here. And then we have optional, enter the address, some phone numbers, and we can also optionally add an alert. So alerts are available for both client and adverse party records. And if you add an alert to someone, so to a client or adverse party in your system, what will happen is anytime they appear in a conflict check or regular search in the future, their name will show up red in the list, and whatever you've typed in as the alert here will show when you hover over their name. So this can be very handy for anything that people should know about this person if they come into contact with them. So I might put something here about, this person gets kind of combative over the phone. It's best to communicate through email. So I'm just going to put part of that to make it a little bit shorter. But you can type in, again, whatever you want that alert to be. And then I'm going to click Save and Search. That's going to save our adverse party. And I'd be able to see any conflict check results for that person, or for that organization, I should say. And then just to show you, I'm going to pop into a separate intake. I'm just going to get into one of these incomplete intakes we have and go to that adverse party step. I'm going to enter that same adverse party, that organization name. And this time you'll see the result from the one we just entered. Again, their name shows up red. And when I hover over, I see that alert. And as I mentioned, you can do that for adverse parties and clients as well. So back to our actual intake here. Again, I can keep adding as many adverse parties as I want to. The other one we haven't discussed is called Common Adverse Party. And that's just a list that your admins will build in your live site. So any adverse parties you all commonly would run into, can be built into this list, so I don't have to type it in each time. So now that we've got some adverse parties on here, we'll go ahead and continue. I could, of course, add more to my intake notes if I wanted to. And now we get to our charge information step. And before I fill out this page, also just wanted to point out, I don't remember if I actually said this before. I know I told you couldn't skip forward in the intake, but important to note that you can go backwards. So if I realize at this point that I spelled my client's name wrong and have to redo my conflict check, I can go back to that first step. I can adjust their name, hit continue, redo my conflict check, and then keep moving throughout the rest of the intake. So you can absolutely go backwards. You just can't go forward past the step that you've completed. So for our charge information, I will choose first our problem code, so our case type, if you will. I then have my list of any charges that have been added and the ability to add a charge. So we're first going to, of course, add our top charge. So you'll see that set to yes. I would scroll through, or I can also search my list of charges. So you don't have to scroll through this very, very long list of charges. You can start to type in a keyword like traffic, for instance, and then see your list of charges that have that keyword. I would also then select my charge date. I can just enter that manually, or you've got your handy date picker as well. And same with arraignment date. We then have disposition and disposition date, but I do see a note that we can leave those blank for intake. So it sounds like we'll probably be updating that information later when the case is opened. So at this point, I would be able to either save and add another charge. So if we have additional charges that I want to add here at intake, I can do that. Or I can click that we don't need to add any additional charges and go ahead and continue. The next step is going to allow me to add an arraignment event. It is optional, so it does show on the screen by default, the entry, but I can click this button that says do not add arraignment event, and then I don't have to add it. So if there are certain case types where you would just not need to enter that information, or maybe you just don't have the arraignment date at this point, again, you can kind of skip it just by hitting that button. But if you do know the arraignment date, you are going to be able to enter that here as an event on the case. So this is the event form. I'd be able to, enter my criteria, my information about when the event is happening, and also add any additional users who should have this on their calendar. So if I know that, someone else in the system is going to be working on this case with me and should be aware and have this on their calendar, I can add those additional users in. And if I don't need it on my calendar, even though I'm there by default, I can remove myself if I, again, don't need this on my calendar. So just select the relevant attendees, and then we would hit continue. And we would move on to our next step, and we've added that event to our record here. And I do see a question in the chat, probably more of an internal question about if a client is arraigned in justice court and then over to district court, how do we cover both of those arraignment dates? Functionally in LegalServer, you can have as many events on a case as you need to. So you could have separate events for each of those arraignment dates in the system. But again, others might comment just on policy-wise what you would do for those.
Leah, we also, when they are bound over from justice court to district court, there needs to be a court change in the system, right? Is that something you covered today, or is that another time?
So that sounds like it would be covered in case management.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so our next step in our indigent defense intake here is to add our custodial status. So we've got our list of custodial status options. Again, you know, the actual values here might be a little bit different for your live site if they don't look quite right, but you'll have your list of values available. You might have some details depending on the status that you choose. You'll have the option to add a note here. So if you want to add a case note relevant to this custodial status, you can do so. And then you've got your start date, which is required. And again, we can put it in manually or use our handy date picker, and an optional end date to enter. If we had added some charges, I think I clicked to that we didn't actually add that charge in earlier. But if I had added some charges, I would be able to associate the custodial status to the charge, and also an institution like we saw earlier. So again, this is going to search all of our organizations that we have tagged as institutions. So I can associate that to the custodial status here as well. And once I hit continue, we have that information. And I would get into our court and case information. So this is going to show me all of the people associated to my case so far that I've entered. So of course, it's our client, me as the assignment because I am the intake worker working on this case, and then our two adverse parties as well. So we see the parties to the case, and then we can enter our caption, select the court to associate, and also enter our case number. And this, of course, we will be able to update this. As I mentioned, that would be more of a case management topic. But if you needed to update this after intake, you will have the ability to do so from that case profile. Now, once I hit continue, we get to our final step of this particular intake, which is basically what are we going to do with this intake process? So we have gotten through the intake, we've entered all of the required data, we've done our conflict checking. What are we going to do with this record from here? Because at this point, again, it's just an incomplete intake in the system. It's not a case record yet. So what I can do is accept it, turn it into a case. I can also reject it. So if I found something that meant we're not able to pursue this case, we don't want to open it in the system for whatever reason, I can reject it here. Or I can leave it pending and make that decision later. So pending means that I'm done with the intake. It's no longer at the intake stage. It's a pending case, but it has not yet been really accepted and opened, or obviously the alternative would be to reject it. So you're going to be able to make that decision later and just kind of leave it pending for now if you need to. But we'll go ahead and accept our case and open it right up. I also have the option to set a case status, and this is more specific where this case is in its life cycle. So yes, it's open, but is it just working? Is it inactive? Is it set for review, etc.? We also have a note associated to that if I want to enter some information. There's, more information relevant to that status that I've selected. We have our date opened. It defaults to today, but I do have my handy date picker again. So if I, really should have finished out this intake yesterday and set it open yesterday, I can adjust that here. It's going to have me, the logged in user, as the user who has accepted this case. It's also going to set the office to my office as the logged in user. And it's also going to set me as the primary assignment. And primary assignment in LegalServer can mean different things to, different programs, but essentially who is the person on staff who's responsible for this case. And there has to be a primary assignment, mainly just so that cases can't get lost in the system. They're always going to be on at least that one person's homepage. And from there, you're going to be able to make as many additional assignments as you want to. We can make one extra additional assignment right here on intake. And then once we have our case and we're in the case profile, again, we can make unlimited additional assignments from there. We also have our funding code selected there. And then as mentioned, of course, again, we can make an additional assignment. So if we already know that, let's say we'll pick on Cindy first in the list is going to be the contract attorney on this case. We can set that up right here at intake. Again, keeping in mind that we can also add those assignments in later. Scrolling down, I have my note box for the assignment. So anytime that you make an assignment in LegalServer, you're going to see this option. And I mainly have this option to notify the person I'm assigning. So if I assigned this case to Cindy, I might want to write a note here, hi, Cindy, I've assigned you to this case. Please start working on X, Y, and Z. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. And then at the bottom, I can click choose recipients and send this note off as an email to Cindy. So I would start to type in Cindy's name, last name, select, and whatever email address is in Cindy's user account is going to pop up here to get the email. I can also add additional users. So if, I want another, I can't think of another last name, but if I want another user to be notified, here we go. I can start to type in their name as well, add them, and they would get the email too. So maybe my supervisor or something to that effect. Also, last to mention is if you want to send this to a non-user, so someone who's not a user in your system or just not their work email. So if for some reason I said, hey, I want to send this to Cindy's Gmail address, I can just type in that email address on the fly, and that will work just fine as well. Along with whatever I've written as the note here, this yellow section will also be appended to the email that gets sent out. So it includes a little bit of information and a link to the case. But really important to note is that if you send this to someone outside of your organization, so someone who can't log into LegalServer, that link will not give them anything. If they click it, they'll be brought to your login screen, and without a username and password, that's as far as they'll get. And really same thing with if you accidentally or on purpose for whatever reason, send this to someone who doesn't have access to the case. So maybe they're not in your office, they can't access this particular case in the system. They, again, are not going to see anything with that link. They would just be brought to that screen that says, hey, you don't have permission to view this case. So you don't have to worry about anyone seeing anything they shouldn't with that link. And obviously it can be really handy if you're sending it to someone who should be able to access that link. They can just click it, get right into that case, see your note, and be able to work on the case from there. All right, and I'm going to delete this so that I don't spam Cindy with this note here. And I do have one last opportunity to add an intake note. So these are the notes we've been adding along the way. Also, remember I turned on the rich text editor in my preferences earlier, so I can do things like bolding and italics here. So now that I have completed our intake, I'm going to hit continue to finish it out. And it is going to bring me right to our case profile, which again is the place I want to be if I want to view all of the details that we've entered about this case, and also do anything with this case like change or add a court, add an event, add more assignments, close the case, etc. So just scrolling down, taking a little bit more of a peek at this profile. Again, we're not going to get too into case management today. That will be for, I believe, next week. But this, again, is where you're going to be able to see all of those details. So for instance, the people associated to this case. So again, we see our assignments that we've added. So I see that I did the intake. I'm the primary. Cindy's the contract attorney. I also see those adverse parties we entered. And if I would have added any family members, I would see those people here as well. So your case profile is made up of these tabs and then fields or lists under those tabs to show you the actual data. And of course, our case notes, we have our 2 notes from intake, my actual intake notes. And then also that note that I started to write to Cindy when we were assigning the case as well. And one thing to just generally mention about the case profile, again, trying not to get too much into case management, but is that anyone who's able to access and view a case like this is going to see all of the notes, all of the time, all of the events, anything related to this particular case, whether or not you are a part of it. So if I'm looking at this list of case notes, obviously I entered both of these, but if Cindy came in, logged in and worked on this case and entered a note, I would see that in this list, and she would see my 2 notes along with hers as well. And same goes with time slips. Anyone who enters time on this case, everyone who can access it would see all of that time. So just keep that in mind when it comes to viewing your cases and working on them here.
Hey, Leah, quick question. I know we haven't, I don't know if this is premature at all, but if a case is listed as completed, the specific question Terry had is like if you get a letter from a client, but really, if anything happens, if you get orders or there are post-trial or post-conviction motions that come in or anything like that, is it possible to go ahead and add those to the file?
Yeah, so you're meaning like a file that's already been closed?
Right.
Yes, so it is possible that it is possible. I say it that way because it's all about how you all have it configured. So you get to decide what actions are still available for closed cases.
Okay. So Terry, we'll take care of that, and I'll go over that with Stan and send out a note about it.
Great. Yeah, and also keep in mind, again, this is something we'll talk about when we get into the case management section, but there is functionally the option to reopen closed cases if it gets to that level where you think, we need to reopen this, and work on the case more. But otherwise, again, it would be up to you all to decide what should be available for closed cases.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, and we are done with our intake, which was, of course, our second topic for today. If there are any requests, as I mentioned, we can certainly walk through the other intake, the non-indigent defense intake. I believe it's pretty similar, a little bit shorter, a little bit less information we're collecting, a little bit different information. But if anyone wants to walk through that, just let me know. We can certainly do so. Otherwise, we have the floor open to any questions that anyone has about anything that we've talked about so far today.
How many of you do things like 432Bs or other things? Would it be helpful to walk through a non-indigent defense one just so you can see it? Comments, hands, anything? Feel free to unmute yourself if you need to answer a question. Looks like maybe we can just proceed, but what other questions do you have through this process? Again, feel free to put it in the chat, or for this session, just unmute yourself to answer the question or excuse me, to ask the question, and then you can mute again. Everybody's pretty comfortable with this then. I want to say I'm going to send out another email after this to the group, but there is the same information will be covered twice a week. So on Thursday, Leah or someone from LegalServer will. Leah, do you know if you're doing the Thursday one?
So I believe Thursday will actually be my colleague Ron. So it'll be the same information, but delivered a little bit differently. So I would encourage you, if you've got the time, to join as well.
All right, you can do that. And then all of them will be recorded as well. In case you have questions, you can come back to them. Stan and I are also working on some kind of handouts, some PDF little cheat sheets that we're going to email you just on some basics so that you can just kind of like keep those handy on your desk or whatever while you're learning the system, but also just to have there for reference. Looks like we might get out of class early here. Is there anything else anybody wants to ask? Terry, do you want to have Leah run through a non-indigent defense intake? Why don't we just do that? Just since we have the time and people can see it demonstrated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
No worries. Yep. So as I mentioned, functionally, we're going to be dealing with the same things. So all of the same things apply that I talked about for our last intake, as far as, not being able to click forward, still being able to go backwards, still being able to, leave it halfway through and come back in. So all of those same things still apply. But again, a little bit different data, a little bit different flow to this intake here. So we've got our county. Again, office is going to default to my office. And it's read only. I can't change that. This looks very similar as well as far as the initial information. Again, we've got our name. We've got the same thing with these date of birth and social blocks where I enter them if I know the information they're required. Otherwise, I can say that I don't have it and I don't need to enter anything. Same demographic field here, language, interpreter, race, and gender, all optional. Same exact address block as we talked about. I can say yes, choose my institution, that will fill in the address, or I can say no and just fill it in, manually for whatever their home address is. Also, same for our mailing address, same phone number options, same option to select what can be texted and the email address as well. So this first page is very, very similar. I think we had a little bit of different defaulting at the top, but otherwise pretty much the same data that we're collecting as our other one. So same thing also with our intake notes. Our next step is exactly the same. So the conflict check step is going to be the same for both of our different intake processes. So again, it's going to return anyone who's a possible match for our applicant here. We can still click into those case records, see more information, and we can also associate with an existing client. I still also have the ability to add and search on any additional names like aliases, maiden names, etc., and another opportunity to add in some intake notes. We continue to our adverse party step, which again is going to be the exact same step as it was on our previous intake. So same thing, I can add any combination of our 3 different types of adverse parties, entering them and conflict checking them as I go. I can also just leave it to no adverse party if I don't have one and continue right past that step. So this one is a new form or page that we have in this particular intake here. So again, a lot of similar information that we're collecting, but a little bit different. So our problem code is just going to default to civil, and then we choose our special problem code. So what type of civil case are we dealing with here? And again, keep in mind, this might not be everything you might do. this might change the drop down as you get to your live site. But you'll see your different types of cases here, like the 432B. And you also have that opportunity to add in an event here. So if I want to, actually have to, apologies, on this one, I do have to add an event. So if I have maybe an initial hearing or something to that effect, I can enter our event, choosing again our day and times, and adding any attendees who should also have this event on their calendar. Once I hit continue, we get to our second to last step, which again is going to be the same court information that we had in our previous intake. So here I can choose my court, set my caption, enter my case number rather, and it's also going to show me those parties up at the top. And fewer people because I didn't bother adding in any adverse parties this time. And then we get to our final step, which again, I believe is the exact same page it is as our original intake that we did, the indigent defense intake. So really same things apply here. Again, I can accept it. I can leave it pending. I could reject it if I needed to. We can set that case status. We can add some notes about that if we want to. Set our open date. Who is accepting the case? That again will be just you, the logged in user, when you're logged in doing this. Office, that primary assignment like we've talked about. Funding code, my option to add an additional assignment on top of the primary. And also, of course, the option to add a note about it and email that note off. And then my last opportunity to add my intake note. Once we continue, we've got our new case created. And one big thing to point out, different between these two intakes, is the case profile that it will direct you to. So I didn't point this out specifically earlier. Apologies, but when we finished out our criminal or indigent defense intake earlier, it brought us to our criminal profile. And this brought us directly to our civil profile. So slightly different profiles, you'll see slightly different information on each of them, again, based on the type of case that it is. But just wanted to point out that that will happen automatically. You'll see the case with the relevant profile based on the intake that you used. But otherwise, as you noticed, the two intakes are very similar. We're just, of course, not capturing, charge information and custodial status and some of those criminal-related data points in the non-indigent defense intake version. All right. Any questions about that? Or again, just any questions generally about what we've talked about so far today?
So Terry has a new question. I don't know if you can answer that. I'm not sure I understand the question, Terry, but multiple children on the order, each child or person in the 432B matter should have their own attorney, shouldn't they? And if that's the case, then those will not be in the same file. You shouldn't, they should be separate entries, or they should be but you only have one of the people, right? One of the children or a spouse or whatever it is. I think we can talk about that either yeah, that's what I thought. So Sherry, would you get all of the children, or wouldn't each child have their own attorney? Again, this is something that, okay, we can field that. I'll talk with the other people in the office and we can get back to you on that. We'll call you or send out an email about that. Okay, because I think it's handled differently in different places, maybe. My understanding is in other places, everybody gets their own. So we'll have an inter-office conversation about that and get back to you all. Thanks for the question. That's important to know. I didn't realize that they were handled differently.
Okay, great.
Any,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. I was just going to ask if there are any other questions.
Oh, well, same. So
Okay, well, if nobody else has any questions, then like I said, we can just get out of class early. Leah, I want to thank you very much for your very skilled presentation here. I even learned new things.
great. Well, thank you for helping lead things along, and thank you all for joining. And I'm sure I'll see you at some more trainings in the future.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll have the same training will be available Thursday from noon to 2. Anyone who wants to tune in again, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.